Talking to Hashem in one's own words, in one's native language, let's say for me, English, is the ultimate prayer. The simplest is the most profound. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov was a great proponent of this talking prayer, that you talk to God for an hour a day, pouring out your heart, all your problems, all your needs, in your own language, like you're talking to a friend. His bodedot, this unification with God, this isolation with God. But quite frankly, it's really an isolation with the self. When you're talking here, you're talking to the self, yourself. Speech is the way to access the most unconscious areas within the self. All of us here in the 20th and 21st century know this from the Freudian perspective, where the analyst talks to an analyst who's behind the screen for an hour, according to the fundamental rule, which is to say anything that comes into his mind and not to inhibit any of his words. Where do you think Freud got this, if not from Rebbe Nachman of Breslov? Rebbe Nachman of Breslov said that all the tzaddikim always use this. This is the great secret. The secret of the simple faith in God that can be expressed only in one's own language. You don't have to learn anything. This expression of talking, like any other psychoanalytical talking, we talk for the reason to get to the parapraxis, to the slip of the tongue, to the revealing aspects. These parapraxes are the entry into the unconscious, into the three heads, the Radla head, the Keter of Arik, and the Chokhmah of Arik. Now, in Hasidus, they've given terms that what these three heads represent will come from the below, the bottom. It's the bottom is the ratzon, the drive, the will to the next head, up to pleasure, which is the Keter of Arik. First was the Chokhmah of Arik, which is will, then Keter of Arik, which is pleasure, and then the third head, the Radla, the Hasidim. Hasidus has given this the term faith. Where'd they get this term? Who decided that it's faith? Radla is the head that's not known, and cannot be known. It's the head that's not a head. It's the totally unconscious aspect of the human being. The only way to access this unconscious is through hisbodedut, talking, speaking, until you can access your drives, your motivations, the real essence, the kernel of the self that resides there. And this is a long introduction to what I propose is what's really going on here in the unconscious aspects. All three of these heads are unconscious aspects of what they are, meaning unconscious aspects of drive, of will, unconscious aspects of pleasure. And then we'll delay here a second, because what is this, what we're really driving at? What we're really driving at is what we're talking about. It seems like a sexual experience there. When we talk about desire, ratzon, when we talk about pleasure, where do we get desire and pleasure from? Not from the genital regions. These unconscious regions and the drives that occupy them. And the third head, which is not a head actually, is a malkuth. It's a feminine head. And for me, and this is the point of all this, for me, this area can only be accessed by the analysis of one's own masturbatory fantasies. The sexual drive of the first head, the pleasure derived from this touching of the phallus, the second head. And the third head, the radla, is the speech, the talking about, the access in this area, the thoughts, the thinking that occurs, while the sexual drive and the physical touching of the sexual drive occurs, what goes on in the brain? The thought that's going on. Later, to access this thought, which is restricted off, one must then return back to it by speech. But in its original entity, it's thought. It's the masturbatory fantasy. It goes on during masturbation. How could this be? How could this be the highest level of the head? We'll be exploring this in further explications. There are many other things here that we'll be discussing, like the still small voice, or the small still voice that resides in the head, which is called by, I think it was Janoff, the silent scream. Where did he get that? How one should scream in the middle of the night. A primal scream, silently. For me, this is the access of the shofar. The shofar, which is Shin Vav Pei Resh 586 plus Yad 14 gives 600, which is a whole other thing we'll get into. But that Yad, the Yad that holds the shofar, is the same Yad that holds the penis. When one performs a masturbation, what can be more primal than that? What area can be more primal than the self, fulfillment of the self? The Ouroboros and its primary stages. So instead of faith in the third head, I look for something that's much more tangible. Something that really connects.